Hello, 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 hello. It is your good friend, Wild Philosopher, here once more to remind you that gnomes are real. And today I have Hound of Heaven with me for a very, very, very special stream, because today we will be talking about Bob the Builder. Can he fix it? Maybe. We will find out. We will
Maybe.
find out. So again, as usual, big spoilers.
Big
We will be
spoilers for the Bob the Builder verse. Uh,
yes. I
you intend to have a pristine viewing experience of Bob the Builder. I suggest that you stop here and go turn on uh, your whatever service streams Bob the Builder and do a full watch through, and then return to us.
rewatch all. I was it 12 or 18 seasons. It's been a while. I watched. I want to say 3 or 4 in advance of the stream. But yeah, rewatch all 18 Bob the Builder streams and then watch this stream. That way it doesn't matter what we say. We won't spoil it for you. But yes, today we're talking about Bob the Builder. This is very much a philosophy stream, so it'll be getting a little technical in places. This is your only warning. We will be focusing on aesthetics. So aesthetics, for those of you who don't know, it's I guess the most immediate. It's the branch of philosophy that studies art. If you start to get a little deeper, go past the first year stuff like what makes a good artwork or whatever. It is the branch of philosophy that concerns itself with what are our how are our what is an aesthetic experience, right? How do aesthetics or relate to other elements of human experience? What does it mean to produce or encounter an aesthetic experience? What is aesthetics, I guess? Meta question here. And in the context of, I guess, Bob the Builder, it'll be both how we engage. Well, I would you say, like 4 angles to this question. There's how are the works, the buildings Bob the Builder builds, aesthetic works. How is Bob the Builder engaged aesthetically in his building? And how are we, the viewers, aesthetically engaged in watching Bob the Builder build?
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to add on there?
I know we stand Bob the Builder in this house.
Yes, actually, funny story. Yeah, it's kind of funny you said that, right? Because the story of this stream was an intellectual journey. It was an intellectual odyssey, writing this stream or planning this stream. It started out with a flippant joke. I believe my remark was Bob the Builder wants to fix it, but he's committed to an aesthetics of the smooth, and that precludes genuine engagement with the transcendental matters. And then we were like, you know what? Let's do a stream. And then we went to rewatch Bob the Builder because it's been a few. Actually, I shouldn't say obviously. It's been a while since I watched it because I watch plenty of children's shows all the time. Lectured for how many hours now have I lectured on the high points of Sandra Boynton as a philosopher and
I don't know. It's
Taoism and Neoplatonism?
You often mention Sandra Boynton. Is all I can say.
Often mention Sandra Boynton. Yeah. Him and I met up, and I was like, "Behold, Sandra Boynton!" Every time we passed by a copy of her work. But yeah, been a hot. Precisely, yeah. Surely Bob the Builder embodies Wittgenstein's opinion that as ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. Precisement. And it's funny you say that because when we started, we were going to be a little critical, and then we're rewatching Bob the Builder, and we're considering our sources. And you know what? We realized, actually, we're in pro Bob the Builderism. We are pro, like Bob the Vitruvian Man, pro Bob as a philosophy worldview. And so this is going to be we're like good scholastic mystic philosophers. We're going to start by raising the objections to Bob the Builder on aesthetic grounds, And then we are going to see if we can't recover Bob the Builder as a philosophical thinker. So yeah, first we're going to bring the philosophers to bear on Bob the Builder, and then we'll see what Bob the Builder has to say to the philosophers. So, Hound, did you want to?
No. This is why you must be intellectually honest. You must learn if if you become an anti-Bob the Builder, you should learn what Bob the Builder actually has to say about things, and then if he's actually sound philosophically, you should change your opinion and accept whatever insights Bob the Builder has for you.
Yeah, called pulling a Hillary Putnam. The encounter or engagement with the other, our opinions are reforged. A fancy way of saying that courage is the root of philosophy. But with that in mind, so I said earlier, we're not really, when we ask ourselves our three questions, like how is Bob the Builder, like how aesthetic are his buildings, right? Like Bob, would we want to, is it uncharitable or maybe too mediocre to say that they are, actually they are not quite, I was going to say they're very, what you call like suburban, American suburbia? Rural?
Yeah, probably.
It's an interesting aesthetic. It's halfway between the American suburb and the British countryside. It is, however, interesting that I was rewatching it and I had not noticed that Mr. Bentley lives in an underground house. And Bob is A, entirely fine with that, and B, engages in construction. For those who don't know the legal history of architecture, which does bear on philosophy, because philosophy is not just a question of ideas, it's a question of how do we put them into practice. Underground houses are illegal.
What?
It's one of those. There is a long, sordid, very bitter battle between government housing authorities, and this is across most of the Western world, from like Canada to America, and certainly in Europe. And the only reason I won't comment about outside of the Western world is I have no idea what South American building codes look like. But yeah, there has been a long and very brutal battle between housing code authorities, who predominantly want houses to be safe and structurally sound, at the expense of, we think of durable or environmentally sustainable materials. This isn't quite noticeable where you are on the planet, but in Canada, this is a real issue because we use the same building materials you use way down south. But Canada is not as warm as way down south, which means our buildings lose heat like mad. And so you have people who, for environmental or economic or just plain weird reasons, like, I don't know, maybe they really like traditional houses, want to live in log cabins or cob houses or semi-underground houses like Mr. Bentley from Bob the Builder, or earth ships. And they have been, it's like a 5-decade-long legal battle going back to the environmentalist movement of the 70s. It is absolutely wild. Canada's a notoriously bad place for this sort of thing. America's much better because environmentalists have been able to draw on them freedoms in the Deep South.
Hell yeah. I said hell yeah.
Yeah, there's an interest for those who have some more interest in the legal side, and I guess the mental side of architecture, which, as I said, relates to philosophy, because we're not just saying what's a good building in the abstract. Where Patui mentioned Wittgenstein's point about the grammar of philosophy is it's always concerned with use. Right. There is a documentary called Garbage Warrior. It may still be on Amazon Prime. If not, you can probably find it online pretty easy. And it I mean, full warning, there's a lot of swearing in it, but it is a very good overview of the complexities involved in actually trying to build an idiosyncratic structure.
You know, it would be hilarious. Speaking of swearing, it would be hilarious if this got like age restricted to children because Bob the Builder. We gotta say something controversial in here. We gotta drop some F-bombs once we get further in, so that we don't get
then we're likely to be labeled children and then kicked off the platform. So let's not do that. But no, anywho. So yeah, the fact that Mr. Bentley, who's also the building inspector in Bob the Builder, has a semi-underground house means that the building codes in Bob the Builder and the attitude to houses is very different from what it might be in most of the Western, again, just for legal reasons, or Anglo-American, I should say, because like I've heard it's really annoying to try and build an underground house in Germany from an acquaintance who succeeded in doing that in the Czech Republic. But I don't pretend to know anything firsthand about like your European or South American building codes. And the only reason I think you could pull it off in Africa is who's going to enforce that. Least of the authorities' concerns. But yes, funnily, which I guess does touch on it, because we start out, very critical opinion or views on Bob the Builder and aesthetics. And then, but it was as we sort of gained, what you call a deeper understanding of the particulars of Bob's nuanced approach to construction, that our views totally changed. So, with that in mind, what is Bob's aesthetics? I mentioned it. Superficially, it looks like English middle class suburbia. Bob,
the idealized town.
Yeah, well, yeah, very much so. I mean, it's called Sunflower Valley, or Bobsville. There's a few towns in Bob the Builder. Yeah, it's not named after him. It's named after his dad, who was this genius contractor. Yeah, this is the deep lore on Bob here. I know you. This is
Bob the Builders. There's
Sorry?
a line of Bob the Builders stretching back into time. No doubt they were members of the Masonic Lodge and constructed their towns according to ancient occult rites.
Precisely. I have a few very funny books that defend that about the Mother Goose nursery rhymes, but it's off topic, so we'll switch back to Bob the Builder. Yeah, Bob. A Freemasonic is that? No, it was Bob, his father, Bob Senior, and I want to say his grandfather is Billy, like Billy Bob. It could have been Billy Bob, but this is an English show, so it's probably Billy and not Billy Bob. But yeah, Bob, and you see, and conventionally speaking, Bob the Builder plots involve the following. Right. Bob is in his main base of operations. He receives a phone call informing him that something is in need of fixing. He goes, "Can we fix it?" And his talking anthropomorphic trucks go, "Yes, we can." And then they all climb on and they all whiz off and they fix it. Right. So it superficially it embodies a much combated approach to the ethics of aesthetics, funnily enough, which sees ethics or aesthetics and activity of that sort as fundamentally a matter of therapy.
Ooh.
This is not in the sense that like psychotherapy, in the sense that there's an object that's originally whole, it is chipped, let's say, and the goal of the philosopher is a sort of Bob the Builder-esque construction figure whose goal is to repair the structure and restore it to its original form. I say much embattled because this has been critiqued very, very, very heavily, mostly in health, include like the aesthetics of health, the ethics of health, what it means to be a healthy person, where it's the view that we exist in a state of normalcy, right? And then we get sick, so we go to a doctor and he eradicates the disease and we return to a state of normalcy, right? I know John Michael Greer has been very critical of that view, although I think he strawmans it and the people he takes to be its proponents. And then of course the obvious critique there is many of us don't spend all our time in a state of normal health. And actually there's not to say there isn't a normal state of healthcare, but there's all sorts of like chronic illness, and then B, there's is normal health merely walking around and living your life as you want, or is it engaged in something more positive? And this would be where you might start building on exercise or having the right diet, or even, I don't want to say engaging in preemptive psychotherapy, but like engaging in activities that people know to preserve a good state of mental health preemptorily. Hmm?
I'm making affirming noises.
Prior to, as a way of warding off illness, but B as a sort of, I want to call it normal, a state beyond the norm. The norm understood as what most people are doing, rather, in that exact sentence. You sometimes see similar approaches to ethics. Again, they tend to be criticized, not just because, the view that ethics is what happens only when something goes wrong, and otherwise there's just a state of normalcy. And the question is, what is a state of normalcy? And then, in aesthetics, you have the same approach. And so, what would you call them? This, I think, is where I'm going to be talking very extensively, just to anchor our conversation, which means to give us a sort of perspective to build on when analyzing Bob. We will be sticking very heavily to a thinker called Byung-Chul Han. We'll be moving beyond him, we will be critiquing him, but we will be sticking with Byung-Chul Han. Specifically, we are drawing on his Saving Beauty and, to a lesser extent, Good Entertainment.
Yeah, I've not read Good Entertainment, but I did read through Saving Beauty through yesterday and today. So.
Beautiful. So you've read it more recently than I, so would you be willing to offer the, again, provisional, what would Han have to say in critique of Bob the Builder?
I think, All right, so the point to be critiqued is that Bob the Builder employs a aesthetics of the smooth, that he's not interested in like the jagged edges of the world, just wants to have everything smooth and shiny, no true borders, nothing to push back on the psyche, but only like this kind of clean suburban perfection without any interruption.
All right, and why
provide psychic pause?
Yeah, and why might that be a problem? Like, let's say we want to defend naive Bob the Builderism, and naive it goes, well, yeah, but existence is like that. It's just smooth. I get in my Tesla, I leave my suburban apartment, I drive to my Google. Let's say I work at Google in this theoretical example, and sit at my cubicle and do work for 8 hours, and then I go back to my apartment in my Tesla. Why is that an issue for Han?
I think it's an issue for Han in that our conception of beauty has changed according to him. Before modernity, there was no distinction between the idea of the beautiful and the sublime. And like the sublime can be painful, the sublime can push back, but beauty beauty now is just kind of it's smooth, it's easy to look at, nothing unpleasant about it. It's like kind of shiny balloons or slick iPad surfaces with no scratches, right?
Yeah, Han goes very heavily after. Can we even say his name on stream? Jeff.
No.
Yeah, I don't think we can. It's one of those unfortunate individuals whose name is now an insult, or a naughty word. We cannot say his name. Jeff Koons. It's his real name. It's his real name. He specializes in making works that he himself defines by their smoothness and by the fact that they just sort of in his words his only goal is to make you go whoa. Right.
Yeah, super smooth.
Super smooth. Yeah, super smooth. So, I mean, maybe Bob the Builder's a bad comparison to Jeff in that respect, since we still got that sort of suburban aesthetic. But
yeah, I think Bob the Builder still at least leans into the idea that there's like kind of a rural country aesthetic.
Well, yeah, we'll get more into that when we defend Bob. Defend or present Bob's reply to his critics. But yeah, it's the. I'm trying to think of like you see this aesthetic a lot in movies because it's considered the futuristic aesthetic, right? It's everything's a smooth surface, it's shiny, it reflects, and because it reflects, it has no depth, right? And so why does Han come out of nowhere, as far as the audience is concerned, to say, art should be sublime? Right, it's not because of his commitment to some it's transcendental aesthetic. It's because he argues, and we'll be critical of Han, but here he's very successful, I think, in arguing that if things are not engaged in the transcendental, if they're merely smooth, transparent, reflective, then they simply have no depth. It doesn't, because they don't allow for any penetration or elaboration or bending, because that would involve a sort of, when things bend or turn around or twist, parts become invisible momentarily, of course. Like you can move, if you have an object that has several parts, you can move it around and see the whole thing. But at any given moment, you don't see the whole thing. It's at least partially a mystery. Yeah, obviously.
I think he'd argue that it's like it leads to kind of this narcissistic. I think Han overuses the word narcissism a lot.
He should be using egoistic. He should be using egoistic. And this is Han is very opposed to the existence of a self. He is an orthodox, an actual adherent of critical theory, and critical theory is a range of techniques. There's several elements for the purposes of the present point. The most important is critical theorists regard the self as an invention of the Enlightenment. So it's not real. It's a philosophical illusion made by Enlightenment theorists, and they want to, in their own, deconstruct is the word they explicitly use. And I think because Han is opposed to the self, And Toto, in its entirety, he uses narcissism when he should be using egoism.
All right. All right.
So yeah, I think we'll stick with egoism because that has less connotations to the, what do they call, the DSM-5, the Manual of Psychological Illnesses. Yeah.
Like we're accidentally messing with people who suffer real mental setbacks. That ain't cool.
Yeah.
So
Hans,
the smooth kind of centers everything around this observer who can kind of consume it, can kind of use it. Whereas for Han, the truly beautiful should become the center of someone's world when they see it, rather than be something to be attained and consumed.
Yeah, and that I think is a pretty good. Han's objection to what he calls the aesthetics of the smooth, or a non, I won't say non-sublime, but an aesthetics centered around the human self is there is no contact with what's outside you. And if it's not coming from outside, it can't, I won't say it can't be beautiful, but it's not going to transfigure you. Right? It's not going to, it might elicit emotions from you, but it's not going to have any lasting impact on your psyche. Is that maybe a good summary of Han's critique?
I think so.
Yeah. And so the Hanian critique of Bob the Builder, would then be that because Bob is engaged in fixing it, like his goal, he exists in this, the Hanian would say, smooth world, right? There's this flat, I wouldn't say flat, but there's this plane of suburban dwellings. The Hanian, or these, and the Bob the Builder as an architectural theorist, as an aesthetic theorist, as somebody engaged in aesthetic activity, which is construction, just to be clear.
Makes perfect sense.
Is engaged in, well, I mean, he is, all architects are aestheticists. They are considered designers, like, as somebody who has worked with and knows quite a few, like landscape architects, and engineers too. They're all designers. I know it's a little hard to believe looking at like New York or San Francisco or Toronto, but yeah, the people who designed those things are considered trained in aesthetics.
I assume engineers here does not mean like control valve engineers, which I'm aware of.
No, the ones who engage in like structural engineers, building engineers.
Yes.
They're not a huge engagement, obviously, but especially as if they have a lot of experience, right? Then they have years and years of experience working with architects, working with like interior designers, working with landscape architects, which, for those who don't know, the landscape architect is the guy who designs all the landscape around the building. And sometimes he'll design elements of the building that intersect with the landscape. So if you're ever at some like public institution and you see a beautiful garden, that was designed with loving care by a landscape architect who would have done all sorts. He would have come in, he would have done a site analysis. He does everything an engineer and an architect does, but with plans. And then nowadays they also have to engage with heritage, right? And intangible heritage. So let's say, what are the native bands that live where you are?
I do not think that is a large concern with North American.
Oh, well, okay, maybe not with American, but yeah, up in like in Canada, let's say you want to develop and to develop here doesn't just mean like chop all the trees and put houses down. It also, like, if you want to develop a waterway, so you have this waterway, And Bob does engage in like landscaping several times. He is a very all-around guy who handles several different things. Bob's big surprise, for instance, he fixes Wendy's garden for her without asking. I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I would not be happy if somebody drove construction equipment through my lawn. But Wendy shows up and she's like, oh, this is so lovely. Because in Bob's world is a world of childlike wonder, and his construction vehicles do not leave giant tire marks everywhere. Oh, bless you, Bob. I wish I had that technology. But sorry, let's say you want to design a waterway, or you're fixing up part of I want to say the forest, but like a public park, and you know that this was not even the sacred land, just like the hunting grounds of the Iroquois or the Algonquian peoples. A landscape architect or an engineer has to be familiar with what are the legal and what moral implications for what you can do with that land. And it's the same in Europe. Like, there isn't really this for non-native lands in Canada, because there just hasn't been a long gardening tradition in Canada. But if any of you ever garden in Europe or engage in any landscaping in Europe, one of the reasons it can be such a pain is you have 3 millennia of intangible heritage that people will take into account when they're doing any repairs to anything. So now that we've been all over the place on that point of view, let's go back to Bob the Builder more explicitly. Superficially, we have what looks here a classic critique of the Haughty and Smooth. Right. Bob exists in his perfect world. As I said, it's like you don't even create tire tracks when driving. And then something happens to that perfect world. Sorry?
A true rejection of negativity. The absence of tire tracks.
The absence of tire tracks. They're so annoying. Last time I had somebody repair, last time I had somebody who had to drive a track through my garden, it tore up. None of you guys garden, you don't like a good garden only has like 4 to 6 inches of topsoil, and then underneath if you're really lucky and you have like really good soil, you maybe have a few more inches of normal soil before you get to the rocky stuff. If you live in suburbia, it's like if somebody drives tire tracks, they just they'll destroy an entire swath of the garden and it'll just never recover. It's inevitable. Like it's sometimes not to, and obviously I'm not going to get mad at anyone who does it if it is inevitable. These things happen. But yeah, it is unfortunate that they drive and you just sit there sobbing, knowing that six feet of dirt is 6 feet of dirt you just cannot plant lettuce on ever again. My cabbages. Oh, actually, that was it was the Cabbage Patch Kid that was destroyed. Cabbages and peas, and they're like, heartrending. But yes, he comes in and he fixes it and he leaves, and it restored to the initial state of perfection. I was about to make an offhand remark, but I think this is an issue with soteriology for some too. But we'll stay on track. We're talking about aesthetics. We're not about eschatology.
The eschatology of Bob the Builder.
What does Bob the Builder have to say in reply to the Cappadocian brothers' comments on the infinite growth potential of restoration from the grasp of sin through? Sorry. That was a fourth century philosopher on soteriology. But back to aesthetics. So then, tree falls on road. Bob moves tree. Road fine. Road gets damaged, Bob repairs road. Road fine. Water main is broken in Inspector Spud. Bob repairs road. Road fine. Superficially, it looks like Bob is engaged in a very smooth activity. Right.
Yeah.
But there are two questions here. One is, even if this is generally accurate, is this more accurate of the particulars? Take, for instance, the case of Bob's phone. Bob does not... Han is primarily a thinker on technology and has written extensively on the way social media encourages flatness, which is... I mean, he blames the internet in general, but he doesn't use it too often, so I think a more nuanced view is social media centric. Part of the reason this series, would you even call it a series, just us talking? I don't know. Part of the reason this exists is it is our express view that this flatness may be true of like Twitter, but it's not true of other platforms like YouTube, where there's a lengthier and more sustained potential for positive discussion with the viewer base.
Yeah, I think parts of it might be true. Say if YouTube Shorts replaces TikTok, that will be a very smooth part of YouTube.
Yeah. Like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Twitter, very smooth locations. But whether that's true of the internet in general is, of course, another and altogether more dubious question. But certainly Twitter. But that being said, we can ask, like, is this... Yeah, anywho, Han very critical of phones, and yet, like, Bob owns one, but a substantial number of the plots involves Bob's either inability or, like, forgetfulness of technology. So there is a question here as to what extent Han's critique is maybe true of the generals, but not the particulars. And then there's an additional question, which is, I guess, the bigger elephant. There's always the elephant in the room. His name is Timbo. Sometimes you can't see him because he likes to turn invisible. But he is always watching, gleefully rubbing his giant... what do they call those feet? Paws? Elephant feet. Gleefully rubbing his elephant feet as he waits for you to notice the elephant in the room. And Timbo I can see him in the corner of my eye, and he's trumpeting out, "But what if Han's wrong?"
What?
What if Han's wrong? We mentioned, I guess we summarized Han's critique very, very briefly. We'll quickly restate it, because I've seen people keep flitting in and out. We'll quickly restate it for the benefit of those who maybe weren't here the first time. Han thinks that a purely smooth, purely reflective approach will preclude a genuine encounter with the other, or a genuine, and will necessarily lead to shallowness and egoism. Specifically a form of egoism involving blindness to other people and other things, like and a lack of penetration into matters. Right, so you'll only get really superficial understandings of things, like if you use Twitter. I couldn't resist.
Twitter now knows X.
Oh, yes.
That's a smooth.
I mean, he based it on a sci-fi show, so yeah. The rename, I can't remember which one it was, but Musk is he's obsessed with the sci-fi show, and he just keeps naming stuff after it.
Ooh, the Cybertruck. That is a example of the smooth right there.
Yeah, well, everything Musk does. Oh, I wouldn't say everything, but is all the stuff he's most known for. Although, to be 100% fair, that's also marketing, right? Future technology that appeals to futuristically inclined people has to be smooth because that's the aesthetic that we associate with the future. Much in the same way that you do not market nostalgia to people by putting flower prints all over the place and woodsy themes. Unless there's a more specific aesthetic theme like the 1950s. But yeah, like smoothness, very future aesthetic. So, I mean, yeah, Musk did it. I also won't be too critical of him for doing it because if he didn't meet people's aesthetic expectations, he would flop. There was a famous fountain pen store that did that in Toronto. All fountain pen stores, very old aesthetics typically. Lots of wood, very dark, very narrow, very cramped. And one of Toronto's most famous fountain pen stores decided to modernize the look. So they replaced all the cramped, old, musty wood with shiny, new, bright surfaces, like plexiglass, I want to say like that silver-colored metal. And they went bankrupt within like 2 months. Because people who buy fountain pens are it's not that it's a field dominated by people who are old and stodgy physically. It's a field dominated by people who are old and stodgy mentally, such as yours truly. And so, like, even
like, now I'm going to the other fountain pen store.
Yeah, that was literally like they would walk in, they'd look around, and it wouldn't be the fountain pen experience. So they would go to another fountain pen store, or stationary shops, right? And like I suspect most people get their stationery these days from like a dollar store or Shoppers. But if you go to a real old-fashioned stationery store, you'll notice it's that very old-timey aesthetic, and it's often not that the store's old; it's the clientele is expecting the old experience. They are expecting that musty smell. They want the feeling of, and this isn't a critical remark. It's I think it's cool. I plan my room that way. But yes, so yeah, we're going to. I guess we'll ask both. So we had two questions. Is this an accurate characterization of Bob the Builder? And even if it is, why should we care about Han's critique? Right. So Han's critique, we need penetration, we need depth. And this is an act of, there's a transcendent act, but in less metaphysical terms, it has to be negative. Right? It has to be jagged. I want to say it has to cause pain, but it has to elicit sensations that are not immediately pleasurable.
Right. All right.
Like if we're watching, let's say we're watching that time I was reincarnated as a sword. That's a very smooth TV show because it doesn't aim to elicit any uncomfortable feelings. He shows up, he beats up everyone that gets in his way, and he gains ultimate power, right? And it hits all the little buttons for a smooth experience.
I think the archetypical one would be in another world with a smartphone, right? Because it even includes smartphones. It is the smoothest tool you can have for a very smooth isekai experience.
Yeah. As opposed to Delicious in Dungeon, which isn't necessarily painful. Like, it's not painful, but it plays with your emotions. It elicits frustration. It elicits it elicits sentiments of cringe. Which I know, like, sound like not in a negative sense, in a like, disgust.
I don't want to eat that. That looks disgusting.
Yeah, like, I mean, a lot of the time, a lot of people, when they get started, they don't really think that disgust is ethically or aesthetically important. And then maybe if they go a little farther, they start to read about how disgust is what keeps you from dying of eating moldering food, right? Or contracting some sickness by handling
Yum, yum,
things
yum.
you, corpses, things you really shouldn't. Generally, right? Don't handle dead. There's a reason they say not to play around with dead animals, right? You get sick, and that's why we have a disgust response. But even beyond that, there's a positive function to disgust, and I think Delicious in Dungeon really played around with that. But we spent 4 straight hours talking about Delicious in Dungeon, so I'm going to go back to Bob the Builder, and if you want to see what we have to say, go watch our streams on Delicious in Dungeon.
Those are great streams. I do.
Yes, we're good streams.
Dungeon. But now this is the age of Bob.
This is the age of Bob. And I think, like, let's look at, Bob, it's not really a show. Well, actually, there are characters. I think a lot of scenes with Spud are intended to elicit groans. You remember Spud? Sorry, Hound.
Yeah.
Spud was the friendly talking scarecrow. He shows up to help Bob out, and then does something he really shouldn't, and ruins everything. And they have to spend all their time picking up after Spud, such as accidentally trapping himself in concrete, or smashing all the bottles so they don't have any more bottles to store drinks. And I think a lot of Spuds, they're intended to be funny, but they're also intended immediately to elicit a groan response. So I think maybe Bob can fight back there with his loyal friend Spud by his side. But we can also ask ourselves, like, is art that elicits that negative response necessarily better? And I think we might safely say no.
What?
Well, what? Yeah, like, shock. Should we tell the Inside Out? We should tell the Inside Out story. Eh?
Okay, let's talk about the Inside Out story.
Yeah. So a while back, Hound and I went to see Inside Out, the new one, Inside Out 2.
Yes.
And we went to see Inside Out. I won't spoil it too much, but let's just say both of us spent, I want to say, like, between half and 2/3 of the movie trying to shut our ears and close our eyes. Would that be an accurate time scale?
Yeah. At least a third.
Yeah, for me it was basically every scene with Riley. It was a lot of teenage cringe. A lot of teenage cringe. I did not need to be reminded of high school that way. Brutal, just brutal. And so when we ended, I think we did compare it explicitly to Han. We sort of talked about negative responses, right? And it was only
this was a experience that elicited negativity, explored it, and made us suffer through it. Yeah, and then I guess the hope was we would grow as individuals. Mainly, the main theme, again, without spoiling too much, is the notion of not embracing the fact that you're not necessarily a good person, which is something a lot of us struggle with. And it was only at the time, I guess we had a overly integrated view of it. We're seeing the movie as a whole. It was only later when I started to really think about it that I realized that the elements that were really prompted thought in us were the smoothest elements, like they were the whole going on an adventure while to recover Riley's mind while anxiety
plays havoc with it. Whereas the bits that elicited the negative responses were the ones that nothing was built off of. Right.
So it was just there to be there to elicit negative responses.
Like it elicited a whole bunch of negative responses, but other than making us cringe a lot and making me like I'm thinking of this movie and I am cringing in my seat here. If this YouTube avatar were more on, you would be seeing me squirm in my chair, but instead you're just sort of seeing my head tilt every now and then. But yeah, we were cringing real hard. But I don't think any of that cringing prompted any serious reflection.
Yeah, no, it's just like, oh yeah, I remember back when Peoples was stupid, including ourselves.
Me. Yes, and I associated with those people I really shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think the only element of the Riley arc that maybe elicited a positive emotion, but I think they could easily have handled it much more, smoothly, was the bit where she apologizes to her friends. But we didn't really need to see all the things we saw for that scene to work. And a lot of children's books. I mean, even Enid Blyton. Did you ever read Enid Blyton?
You always give me like weird children's book authors are like, have you ever read this one thing, Hound? And I go, well, or I have not read this.
I'd have to double check. Enid Blyton may be the best-selling children's writer of all time.
All right.
She was a British author, and she has let's just say she has a very subpar reputation for the quality of her children's books. So every now and then, when you guys read children's books and you read people talking about children's books, you'll notice a lot of people complain about children's books that treat children like they're stupid.
All right. Yeah.
That was why Tolkien hated Disney, I learned the other day. Tolkien, Lewis took children very seriously, not just emotionally, but mentally. There's a very famous, if possibly apocryphal, anecdote of how he went to a very important dinner of Oxford University professors and spent half an hour discoursing seriously with a 6-year-old boy about how disgusting Brussels sprouts were.
This is Lewis or Tolkien?
Lewis, C.S. Lewis. But Tolkien was the same. Tolkien was substantially the same. Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and The Black Arrow, which isn't super famous nowadays, but it's a lovely work. Very similar views. You'll notice his novels do not take children as if they are stupid. They take children very seriously. George MacDonald wrote The Princess and the Goblin, founder of fantasy, so this is way, way, way back. Took children seriously. Kenneth Graham, Wind in the Willows, took children seriously. And then you have progressively... You get writers who take children progressively less seriously. Dr. Seuss, there's ongoing disputes. It depends mostly on how well you think children can handle rhymes, as to how seriously his writings take kids. Dick and Jane treats children like they're morons. And Enid Blyton was renowned for writing, possibly wrongly. I'll just say that for anyone listening who loves Enid Blyton, is like, don't insult my favorite kids author. Like, this is just her reputation. It could be wrong, but she was renowned for writing very, very, very shallow, very smooth kids books.
Well, Philosopher lives in a world where there is massive beef surrounding children's book authors.
This is the only world.
There are stabbings in the street. There are fireballs.
And if those people who were stabbing each other were off reading children's books, Checkmate. But yeah, I mean, these days people fight each other over everything, right? So to be, I don't want to say as inoffensive, but if I am going to offend you, I don't want it to be over Enid Blight. Like, let's pick something serious to fight over, right? Like the reasons people are stabbing each other in the street. It's time to talk about Canadian ethno. No. Surprise half-hour discussion about. I won't even say it. But yes, Enid Blyton. But even if you read like Enid Blyton, stories from fairyland, you still see that fundamental motion of like problem, like interpersonal problem. John Tiddlywinks the gnome stole all the candy. Solution: Tiddlywinks has to make candy for everyone at the candy puller, and he has to apologize. And then growth: Tiddlywinks vows never to steal candy again.
I believe that this is corrupting the youth. Tiddlywinks should face the guillotine for his candy theft from his peers.
It's in the Korean romance montage.
Yes, the Korean romance novel Solution to Tiddlywinks the gnome.
Sorry, for those of you who've never read a Korean romance, it is the infamous joke. It's like little Lily, the 6-year-old, pushes Annie, the 6-year-old, and then the prince, who's 7, comes in and puts Lily to death. And the readers are all in the comments like, yeah, kill her. It's like, what do you think? She's 6. What do you want? I believe I've compared them to Berserkers of Corn before.
Yes, the average.
The predominantly not, yeah.
The average Otome Isekai reader could give Coordinate Berserkers a run for their money.
But yeah, like Inside Out, it provoked no reflection, at least not in the cringy parts, where the smooth parts were whatever. They did produce a reflection. I'm unclear about whether it was a necessary or a useful reflection in kids. But I guess it'll depend on what you're reading them as a parent. But compared to Bashing Crashing Benny, right?
All right, tell us about Bashing Crashing Benny.
This is season 12, episode 8 of Bob the Builder. Benny, who's, what do they call them? The machine with a blade on the front, handle blade. Some sort of Benny's a construction machine. He has his arm on the front like an elephant nose. It's been a long time since I last seriously discussed construction equipment. You are going to have to excuse my comparative lack of knowledge on this topic. And Benny gets a new attachment. And this new attachment is, I want to say it's a pneumatic drill. Front-mounted pneumatic drill. He becomes Bashing Crashing Benny, and he wants to go around destroying stuff. For the sake of construction. Like, we have a building here that's, infirm. We smash it down. We put a new building on top. Right? We've all of us have seen, maybe we haven't seen the actual act, but we've all seen various stages of that. But he has a problem.
He's fulfilling his teleological duty.
Yes. He's fulfilling his Aristotelian teleological duty as a construction apparatus to construct. But Benny has a problem. Benny has a real big problem.
What's the problem?
A viewer pop in, hear the phrase Aristotelian teleological duty, and leave. Benny is a problem. Benny is a problem here. And this problem is that everyone in the town, I want to say this is Sunflower Valley, which you can see behind me because I'm using it as my screen today. Everyone in Sunflower Valley has been really getting into recycling and fine, detailed construction work. And all the construction, a lot of very 1970s-ish environmentalism, which is building stuff out of garbage, reusing stuff, in making things very small. This is called the appropriate technology movement, for those who are wondering where I'm getting this from. There was a lot of the solar power, wind technology was designed back then. The goal being that everyone, the idea was that everyone in a city could power and feed, maybe not exclusively power and feed themselves, like you still might be dependent on the city, and obviously you're not going to grow every vegetable because that would be you'd have basically be subsistence farming, but that everyone could at least contribute substantially to growing and powering their own house in order to reduce the load on the environment, right? Like decrease the amount of coal, nuclear, oil, etc. / imported food. And that was the appropriate technology movement. Mr. Bentley's semi-underground house is an example. Cold frames are another. A cold frame is it's a glass frame that's designed to reflect light in a specific direction for the purposes of heating up the interior. You use it to grow plants that would die in your growing zone. It would let, like, if you live in growing zone 6, it'll let you grow plants from like growing zone 8, which is just climate zones. So, for instance, I don't think you can grow raspberries down there, right, Hound?
I have no idea.
Okay.
But this is what we're here for, is wild philosophers, ecological.
Well, I mean, this is one of the issues with people posting about, like, I wish we all lived in, we were, like, making castles again, right? Is castle, like, a good building or architecture, I mean, you want it to be beautiful, right? You want it to be durable, but it also has to take into account the local climate. It has to take into account local materials. Cob houses work in Canada because Canada, I mean, there's a lot of clay, and because the way you get weather in Canada is it facilitates building. A cob house is made out of clay and straw packed together. Sorry for those sitting there going, what's he talking about? Cob houses would work much less well in, like, Texas or Alabama, where you're not going to get you're not going to get as much humidity. It's going to be a lot drier. That might have a negative impact on the clay.
Depends what part of Texas you're in.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, overgeneralizing, right? But
it's hot, but like Texas can be pretty humid.
Well, yeah, same with like, yeah. So like, there are places in the southern United States where you would not want to build a clay house. Yeah. And so if we're talking about what is a good approach to architecture and what's a good aesthetics of architecture, and we don't want to just be engaging in la land, like overly theoretical discussion, we have to look at what am I actually going to be able to build, right? You're probably not going to want to build a very traditional log cabin in Texas, right?
Nah, I don't think that.
Likewise, you are not going to want to build you're not going to want to build a tropical house or a house out of glass in Quebec or Alberta. These are just not good houses, no matter how nice they look. So yeah, Mr. Bentley's half-sunken house is very 1970s, and he's using cold frames to improve the growing zones. And to get back to our discussion, Bash and Crash and Benny, as he's now calling himself, shows up, and he shows up at Mr. Bentley's and asks if he can destroy all the stuff to help him. Bentley's like, I'm building a cold frame, which is only like a foot or two big, so it doesn't even come up to Benny's tire track because he's a machine. And Benny leaves despondently, and then he goes to Wendy. So I almost said Jenny, and I'm like, it's not Jenny. It's Wendy. He goes to Wendy, but she's also building with glass. And then he finds like another guy, and that other guy is recycling. So he doesn't need Benny at all because he's not even destroying anything. And in despair, Benny wanders off to get rid of his new pneumatic drill, but he decides to do a painting. Or he decides to test it out he wants to bash a tunnel through the wall, and it doesn't work. And all it does is it ends up, he thinks he can make a painting, and it just sort of ends up burying him in shale. And then behind the shale, they discover a dinosaur, a full plesiosaur skeleton, which I think there's only 50 on the planet, so evidently Sunflower Valley is one lucky town. That would have been destroyed if Benny weren't bluntly, weren't incompetent at his job. Right. So this is, it's a smooth experience. Would you call that a smooth experience? It's certainly very fun for kids, but it might also, I guess, produce the young boys are total, and Bob the Builder's audience. I won't say it's obviously not going to be exclusively men or even mostly men, but like the people who really get into construction are stereotypically mostly boys, right? And they're going to be sitting there rooting for Crash and Smash and Benny the whole time because destruction is awesome, right? What young boy does not love watching giant machines destroy stuff with pneumatic drills? This is the wow experience of 4 to 8. I was about to say 4 to 8 year olds, but I think 30-year-old guys like seeing it too. It's cathartic, right? You're just sitting there, and this giant machine roars up, and then bam, destruction, lit. So it's a very smooth experience. Maybe not literally smooth, but it elicits that smooth reaction.
Yeah.
And yet it's much more memorable, and it's going to have, these are kids, this is a kids show, so maybe if you're adults, not what I've just said is not all that impressive, but for kids, that is very thought-provoking. Right? That it's because Benny was able to destroy gently, because he's not as strong as everyone else, that Benny was able to actually do something valuable.
And so kids do love their dinosaurs, as well as some adults.
Yeah, well, okay. Everyone loves dinos. Yes. Right. There are certain things that are perennial to the human psyche. And that is, especially the young male psyche. That is destructive machinery and cool monsters. This is for anyone here who writes children's books or spends time with children as a teacher or whatever. This is your key. As somebody who works with children, this is your key to always have their attention. Right? Explosions, giant machinery, cool monsters, dinosaurs, aliens. Just magic wizards. They love it. That is the secret. This is the secret to sustaining children's attention en masse for lengthy periods of time. Yes. Explosions. Yeah. So it's a wow experience. It's a very wow experience. It's a very smooth experience.
The Michael Bay School of Childcare.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's almost a pity, actually, that the Transformer movies were geared more to adults, because kids would have loved those. They would have been so fun if they were geared more towards a younger audience, which in context would just mean less I want to say dirt, but less gritty shots and certainly much less swearing.
Yes.
But heck, I don't know. When did you first see Transformers?
I don't remember. I don't remember dates. What do you take me for? Mathematician?
I want to say...
I said, what do you take me for, mathematician?
Well, I want to say I saw it like when it came out. So I would have been really young. Really young. Wait, let me pull up this date. Like 8. And I think I watched it a dozen times. Yeah, I would have been between 6 and 10 when I first saw it. I want to say I watched it a dozen times in like the next 6 months. Absolute classic. And I still watch the original 1984 Transformers yearly because it's freaking awesome. Right? Explosions. Ooh. Yeah, giant monsters.
All right, so we got our machines. We got our plesiosaur.
Yes, we got our plesiosaur. And as I said, it elicits, maybe not for adults, right? Like thinking as a kid here. Adults, of course, it's obvious that sometimes you have to be gentle when destroying something to elicit something more beautiful. For children, it's not so obvious. And one of the things you have to remember, anyone who works with children has to remember, is children are just going to apply the maximum force. They will if you have this is why one of the reasons why they break so much stuff. They're not malicious. They are applying the maximum force, and it is having the maximum impact. And if they were more gentle, they could actually, well, I mean, yeah, like bashing, crashing Benny, who could not engage in the bashing and crashing you so desperately wanted to do for 10 straight minutes, because Bob the Builder episodes are 12 minutes long, at least at this point in time. Like once he was doing it at the smaller scale, he was able to do something very useful for the entire town, and the dinosaur is held. After they move it to the museum that, funnily enough, bashing, crashing Benny offered to destroy earlier.
Foreshadowing. Yes.
Foreshadowing. Yeah, Bob the Builder foreshadowing. So, like, clearly there are instances where a smooth narrative might elicit the same phenomena that that Han is hoping to get out of a negative narrative. At least, maybe superficially. An additional point, I guess, could be brought. We're not going to read the passage, because for those who have watched us talk about Han before, you know that there are things. He uses terminology that is certainly not... It's geared to a very specific type of encounter with the other that is not generally constitutive of encounters with the other people, other things. But he insists on using that terminology anyways, and in many cases it's intellectually inappropriate. It's also morally inappropriate, because the encounter of the other he's most interested with is the one involving man and woman. So we're not going to read the paragraph, but would you like to summarize his application? So he's talking about aesthetics. He starts talking about what makes good writing, right? When would you like to summarize?
Oh, I have to pull it up.
What he's
with
different language.
Okay, so I sent you that. I don't think he's talking about writing in that thing I sent you. I was
aesthetic encounters. Yeah, I mean, your application was writing.
Okay. How do I even No, that is like impossible to translate.
That's right. Yeah,
all of the P word.
I passed the buck. The buck got passed back.
Like, yes, we can't use this language. Would you like to summarize?
So, to preserve the let me put it this way: to preserve the distinction between myself and another, or these are technical terms in philosophy, but their meaning is the vernacular meaning. So myself, me, the other. I mean, the most obvious other here is Hound. The next most obvious other is going to be the people watching this video. Technically, Bob the Builder as a TV show is also an other, but that would be the more amorphous, what's called conceptual other, media other. Point is the not me, my relationship between myself and the not me. And Han points out very reasonably, that in order for the difference between me and Hound to be noted, there needs to be distance. Right. So I believe have I quoted the passage by Han on spectacles before on this channel?
Oh, I don't recall.
Okay. Fortunately, I can pull that one up in 5 seconds flat. And that's maybe a better way of phrasing the passage you can't read. Let me pull it up.
We just read it so that we don't get labeled as like kids only. And
no, it's fine.
For that reason.
Here. So this is from In the Swarm Digital Prospects, which is Han's main book on social media. Literally, respect means to look back. It stands for consideration and caution. Rücksicht. This is the German word. Respectful interaction with others involves refraining from curious staring. Respect presupposes a distant look. The pathos of distance. Right. So if you respect someone, you start by acknowledging that there's a distance between you and them. Right. This is going to be the distance of privacy, the acknowledgement of personal boundaries, the acknowledgement that they have a right to their own opinions, that their opinions aren't yours, that you're going to understand their opinions on their views on their own terms, and not by erasing them and putting yourself on top, which is a very, very common mistake, especially when we're trying to think about when we're talking about how to understand other people charitably. We often fall into the mistake of thinking it needs to be charitable to me. And then I end up erasing parts of their worldview that make me uncomfortable, or reinterpreting them to fit my views. And then I have a good view of them, but it's a good view fundamentally predicated on a lie and rooted in my own ego or self-perception. But anywho, respect presupposes a distant look, the pathos of distance. Today it is yielding to the obtrusive staring of spectacle. The Latin verb spectare, from which spectacle derives, is voyeuristic gazing that lacks deferential consideration. That is, respectare. Distance is what makes respectare different from spectare. A society without respect, without the pathos of distance, paves the way for the society of scandal. And as I said, this is the book on Twitter. You don't even talk about Twitter all that much in the book, but any of you who've used Twitter you just know what he's talking.
It's yes, this is what he is talking about.
This is what Han actually I think he wrote. Yeah, he wrote this book before. No, Twitter was big. But yeah, distance is predicated on respect, and in a sense, so is feelings of like friendship, intense admiration, etc. In contrast to staring at others. And this leads Han to conclude that part of this negativity or part of this distance works of art should have, or aesthetic acts should have, is there should be a hiddenness or an obfuscatory element. Right. And I believe you sent me that passage, and I had to look it up. I had to look up you called it window pane. You said Han is defending stained glass prose rather than window pane prose. And I had to go
making that.
Hmm?
Yeah, so he's accidentally making that defense.
Yeah. So window pane prose. For the record, Han is quoting very extensively from Theodor Adorno, founder of critical theory, in the passage that we can't read on this stream. Chapter 11 of Saving Beauty, if you want to find it yourself. Continental philosophers and their choice of terminology, man. Window pane prose is from George Orwell, and it's his notion that there's two approaches to prose, generally speaking. And we can think of buildings as a sort of living prose. A lot of architects have done that themselves, right? A building tells a story. So we can apply this directly to the types of buildings Bob constructs. There's clear prose or window pane prose, which lets you see through direct to the other side. And then there is stained glass prose, which distorts what's on the other side. Purple prose would be
very pretty. I said, but it's
pretty. But it's pretty. It's very pretty. It distorts what's on the other side, but it's very pretty. The best in our time, this dispute has played out extensively between the two followers of both of these theorists. You have Susan Sontag, who was a big fan of Theodor Adorno, and was famous mostly with New York literati, upper crust. And then you have the champion of window pane prose, basically, Brandon Sanderson, who much more popular, certainly with kids, much more child friendly. He has written kids series.
He has also defeated all of the Elden Ring bosses except for.
I thought you were to say it also defeated all the Elden Ring bosses, including Amazon.
Yes.
I still can't believe they folded.
He's defeated all of the. He still has not defeated Amazon at level 1 yet.
Did they not agree to change the way they?
Oh yeah. He made Amazon Audible renegotiate pricing. It's still not perfect, but for like indie authors. Because
anything was better than what they were doing. Yeah,
I will not publish my new audiobooks on Audible.
Yes.
And they're like, no.
in protest. So God bless that man. That was he took a big cut for those of us, like, as you guys can see, I self-publish. You can find a little link to my stories at the bottom there on Amazon. Took a big cut for us, so he has my gratitude. Superficially, what we have here is a conflict between negativity and smoothness, or positivity, right?
Yes.
And yet, I mentioned, I've met a lot of people in my life who quote extensively from Susan Sontag. They are all the type of people who like to quote writers to make themselves sound smart. I don't know anyone who reads Susan Sontag because they genuinely like her and think she's a good writer. I like. I can barely even think of any. Like, I know there's social criticism that tends to be read, not even her novels. Similar, I guess, to figures like Rupi Kaur. I'm trying to think of a few. A lot of European novelists, very like read by the people who review books, and not by the public. And then their books just remain in print forever, and you're like, why? When Edgar Rice Burroughs isn't in print, it's tragedy, absolute tragedy. But and then you've Brandon Sanderson, like which after J.K. Rowling, best-selling fantasy author alive. Would that be a fair assessment?
Probably. Like,
yeah.
I mean, there's George R.R. Martin, stuff like that, but yeah, popular fantasy.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Fantasy in the sense of writing actual fantastic fiction, though. Martin is Martin is the anti-fan. Like in the fantasy was supposed to be fantastic, in the sense that it was supposed to be a sort of transcendental opening up of another possible world, and Martin's main goal is very explicitly to not do that. Like on one hand, it's not charitable. On another hand, I don't think he's a fantasy writer. Like, yes, there's swords and sorcery and weird creatures, but that does not a fantasy novel make. That just means it's a novel with swords and sorcery and weird creatures. Has to be fantastic. I'm going to be a stickler about this. Stick in the mud. Anywho. Top-selling fantasy writer of all time, is very explicitly writing for popular appeal. His writings are smooth, and yet they do have that negative and that transcendental impact. Right? We were talking before the stream started to pick. We'll stick with children. Sanderson's written some adult fiction. We'll stick with his children's works here, like stuff like The Rhythmatist, Steelheart. Like, it is smooth. These are fantasy novels. They're action packed.
It's stylistically smooth, I'd say.
Yeah, stylistically smooth.
But yeah, I mean, just in his adult stuff, I'm thinking of the Stormlight Archives. There's just like dude with depression who's just like looking off the cliff and being like, I should probably jump. Very not smooth. Yeah.
Actually, you know what I think was the best encounter with the other in the Stormlight Archives? The scene in, is it the first or the second, where what's the main female, Shar something?
Damn.
Okay. Yeah, we can't. Anywho, they're traveling through this country, and they're looking at all these statues of really famous people. And they're like, wow, these must have been great warriors or generals or whatever. And the one woman tells the other, no, these are just farmers.
Shalon.
Shalon, yes. Yes. And is it Jasmine is the other one? Jasmine?
Yasmin.
Yasmin. Yeah, Yasmin tells Shalon, like, these are all farmers. I think it's Yasmin. It might be somebody else. It might have been somebody else. There's a lot of characters. And that, to me...
or Yasna.
That...
Yasna, sorry.
Yes, yeah, like that to me... Do you talk about... Wittgenstein talks about, like, aspect perception, and it's the way, like, we see objects as if a certain way, and it totally transfigures our vision of the world for a moment. Not that I want to go about putting statues about farmers, but it totally transfigured, like, the way I saw history and the way I saw philosophy too, the history of philosophy, and how to do it, and what it truly means to be engaging in philosophy. So I know it's weird. Like, it's not all that important to see. I think it's what, 1 page, 2 page. Just sort of like couple side character. I don't think it was Yasmin and Chul. I think it was some random merchant girl who never appeared again. And I think it was like it was just backstory, but totally transfigured the way I saw the world and my vision of
You were just like,
how the
holy
world
crap.
works.
People
yeah.
could be statues of farmers.
Well, yeah, it was a serious point though. And you can actually, like, if we want to talk about, the aesthetics of the Smooth and Bob the Builder, and like we were sort of focused, we were actually just accepting the givenness of the situation. But like, if you think about it, isn't it like the whole city is just very weird because of its social arrangement. Right. How many of us, how many of us think could name a nearby construction worker that's not friends or family? How many of us can name someone who is engaged in the like construction? The construction worker is the guy who actually builds the thing, but behind every building you see being constructed, there's like 5 times as many people involved in administration and shipping and quarrying and planning and all this other, probably 10 times as many people. The amount of effort it takes to build one house is truly amazing. Right. How many of us could say we know a construction worker or anyone involved in the field?
Well, apparently Bob's father was so prolific that they named an entire town after him. So perhaps in the way that they make statues of farmers in Way of Kings, the construction workers are the true philosopher kings of Bob the Builderverse.
Yeah. Well, it's an overwrought social critique of our society, but it's not a totally nonsensical one. That the laborers tend to fade into the background. And I don't mean they're very well paid, right? Like,
yeah.
The guy who does your plumbing, the guy who does your electrical work is very well paid. He is probably oftentimes he'll be making more than you are. He's certainly making more than I do. Not that would be much of a contest. Because philosophy doesn't pay well. It is what it is. C'est quoi c'est, as I always say to my sobbing French acquaintances. C'est quoi c'est.
You really tried to immanentize that.
Yes, I will spread it. I will get c'est quoi c'est accepted as an idiom of French/Franglish. We will be c'est quoi saying all over the place while the French just sob into their grammar textbooks.
Based.
No, like
I believe anything that upsets the French.
Yes, the people who structure are a lot of the background of our society they're in the background. Right. Whereas the people that we tend to accredit they're the ones who are more famous, quote unquote, but they're also the ones who often have the least impact. Like, look at the amount of anguish we pile on top of who the prime minister is, when the prime minister's impact on the country is way smaller than the impact of members of provincial parliament or mayors or NGO leaders. There are probably individual writers who have more control of this country than the people in Justin Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister of Canada at the moment. Mm-hmm. He had to bend the knee to Taylor Swift. And so I actually do think it is worth noting, we talk about Bob the Builder and aesthetics, that the whole way the town relates and the way they relate to each other, Bob the Builder's fixing is seen as an aesthetic act, and it's seen as an honorable act. right? Bob the Builder is a very important and beloved member of his community. And the only place I've ever seen that done before is the utopia that is Richard Scaryland. But how do I put this? I guess to criticize myself here, which we can do because we only got one person watching now. Oh, that's just me. It's counting myself. That's awkward. Criticize myself here and like maybe go defend on like Orwell's window pane prose is just objectively incorrect. There is no such thing as transparent language. There's all kinds of convoluted philosophical arguments. I think the main issue is that language is polysemous. It has multiple meanings. Its meanings are often contextual. Like think of the meaning of the phrase farewell. It has a direct meaning, right? It means goodbye. Like to say goodbye or to see, like do well in future, farewell. But its impact and its meaning is also going to entirely change depending on the surroundings, right? Like I'm off to buy eggs, farewell. Is one that's one meaning or one impact of farewell. It's one day one day I hope I can return from this abhorred war. To hold you in my arms again, farewell. That's another and altogether different meaning. And that meaning is entirely dependent on the surrounding context. And this is just before we start getting into the issues of like the connotations of language, metaphor in language. Like there's just no such thing as a transparent language. It would. In the words of, I saved a quote for this exact moment. That is not the quote. Here we go. In respect to philosophy and in respect to Bob the Builder as a philosopher, and I think we are sort of developing Bob the Builder's philosophy here by analyzing some cases. This is a quote from Hans Georg Gadamer's Hegel and Dialectic. The power of talk to perplex can have a genuine philosophical function. By confounding preconceptions, it is capable of opening up a view of the true relationship of things.
All right, I can dig it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my example here, I guess in my notes, my main example was Pilchard Goes Fishing, Season 2, Episode 13, Bob the Builder. This is an episode where the whole plot is driven on, what do you call it, omissions? Structured and purposeful omissions of data.
Ooh.
So people are not lying.
Yeah.
People are not lying, but they're aggressively omitting relevant data to prevent Bob from learning that Muck the truck has accidentally smashed up the garage by driving into it. They don't want Bob to know. Bob doesn't mind when he finds out because Bob is a rotund, jolly Englishman and doesn't care. But Bob, they are avoiding it, and at the same time that they're engaged in these contortions, Pilchard, which is Bob's cat, I don't know why he's called that. There's probably some meaning to Pilchard in English.
I think it has something to do with like apples. But go on.
Okay. Pilchard is trying, like...
Oh, it is a type of fish.
it's funny because we're about to talk about fish.
Okay.
Yeah, so the episode here is Bob is trying to clean out his fish tank when he realizes he has to go work. He has to go fix it. So Wendy offers, but then Wendy takes the fish out of the tank, and then she forgets about it because the truck smashes through the garage. Michael Bay style. And so while Wendy's off fixing the garage before Bob gets back in what is a truly impressive feat of construction at speed with no regard for local permits or damage reports. Because again, Bob lives in a utopia where paperwork is fairly real and is handled by Mr. Bentley and on a clipboard.
Besides, Bob is the philosopher king, therefore all such paperwork will be expedited in his favor.
Yeah, Bob simply has the power to. This is the world of Hesiod's two strifes, right? There's the good strife that leads to growth and struggle and improvement, and then there's the bad strife that's just annoying. And Hesiod didn't live when they had paperwork, but he nonetheless was prophetically intuiting what paperwork was when he wrote that passage.
Yes.
So, while Wendy's off fixing that, and Bob is working at his job in blissful ignorance of the fact that his garage was destroyed, Pilchard the cat decides to eat the fish.
So the cat named Fish decides to eat the fish. All right.
Yes, the cat named Fish decides to eat the fish, which is sitting in a bucket. And Pilchard goes. He keeps going for the cat. He keeps going for the fish. That would be a TV episode if the fish went for the cat. Sorry. But a series of, again, wacky, all these communication errors and the stress of maintaining them means that there's constant interruptions into the narrative. It's not that Wendy sits down and does the repairs and nothing happens. There's interruption after interruption after interruption. And each time there's an interruption, Pilchard is stopped from eating the fish. And eventually, just as he's getting the fish, when Wendy and Bob are both together, they see what he's doing and think he's trying to draw their attention to the fact that the fish has been out all day and has to go back in its tank. And then and they decide that since Pilchard has been such a good cat by helping them out this way, they're going to feed him fresh fish. So yeah, you can see Bob's Bob, the TV show is playing around with language and our perception of language, and in a way, how that, funnily enough, does end up revealing, reality is ultimately revealed through language, but language plays.
Yeah.
Because the fact that language is often connotative and metaphorical and polysemous, which multivalent, has multiple meanings, means that yes, it can obscure, it can also evoke. Right, it can also evoke. I had some wonderful examples from. Actually, I can't read the passages from Giordani Bruno. Yeah, hold up. Here. Go and catch a falling star, get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear mermaids singing, or to keep off envy stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. That is a very famous poem by the 16th century poet John Donne. Any of you who've watched... Actually, tragically, they cut it from Howl's Moving Castle, didn't they?
Ooh.
They cut it from Howl's Moving, like if you ever read the book, like the children's book Howl's Moving Castle, by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a lovely, lovely book that I heartily recommend, and we might even do a full analysis of it at a later time. You'll notice much of the plot is arranged directly around this poem, or that passage from the poem. That is very much not window pane prose, right? Like that is it's very circuitous, it's heavily metaphorical, and yet the meaning is obvious. Right, the meaning is so obvious it almost doesn't need to be stated, because it lists a whole bunch of impossible things and then asks us to find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. And this is a poem about the difficulties and perils of finding true or honest love. Right? Sincerity.
Yeah.
And so we do see, like, I think, and this is an issue with Hahn, it's an issue with Sontag, it's even an issue with Orwell, this mistaken view of language that I think, Bob the Builder might have actually as the edge here. Bob the Builder is ahead of Hahn, because Bob's constructions, and this is, I talked about Bob's, like, the way he talks and the way others talk to him, but we can also look at the way he actually does build. Right, like season 1, episode 6. What was its name? It was Bob Saves the Hedgehogs. Bob. You can see that Bob is not simply building arbitrarily. He is engaged in a deep, heartfelt consideration of how his building relates to the landscape. In this case, the hedgehogs that have to cross through roads. And so Bob's realization that hedgehogs cannot safely cross roads, anyone who does not share this realization has never been in a car. It is a tragic experience.
Well, I don't believe we have hedgehogs here, but deer. We do have deer, which is often a tragic experience for the people who said deer, because
every now and then somebody hits a moose up here. That always goes well. Like anyone who's passed by a road has seen all the wonderful hedgehog-like fluffy animals that were not aware of the existence of multi-ton metal death machines hurtling down the road. But Bob is. And Bob is aware. Fortunately, in Bobsville, or in Bob's world, hedgehogs are also reasonably intelligent, and if you create a tunnel underground marked for hedgehogs, they know to use that instead of just crossing the road.
Yes.
There's another. Sometimes they would rehash episodes because, of course, when you're doing children's shows, like if your children's show is 12 seasons long, your audience changes 3 times, 4 times over the course of the show. They later did a rewrite of that one, and it was, instead of digging a tunnel under, Bob creates a clearly painted hedgehog crossing with a sign telling the hedgehogs where to go. Which is, funnily enough, very Hahnian, like seeing all objects and things as relating to objects and gazing at them a different way. Most of us, we live in the real world where the hedgehog would be incapable of distinguishing between the hedgehog crossing and any other place of the road, and would meet a horrible, horrible end at some other spot.
Return to the Edenic state where hedgehogs can indeed read street signs.
Yeah, but obviously this is a kid's show on one hand, but on the other hand, it's a fascinating exercise of the intellect not just for kids, but for adults too, to imagine the type of world where hedgehogs can read street signs. That being yeah, and I mean the whole episode. For the record, you often don't even need to hit the hedgehog; they'll just have a heart attack if the car passes too close. They are not. I was going to say they're not hardy animals, but to be fair, they're not evolutionarily designed to survive multi-ton metal death machines in the same way nothing is. So it would be hard to be critical of hedgehogs. We have here as well. What you call it? Like, we have here like a negative smoothness. Is that maybe a nice way of saying it?
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
with bash and crash. These are negative ways of smoothness that are smooth. They are semi-transparent, but they play around with that smoothness, and in doing so, they create depth. And some of the other, some other good examples here that, like, you know, I just used an example of architecture, but an example here of prose would be the children's novelist Eva Ibbotson, whose novel Isle of the Ants is an absolute classic. And some quotes here such as, compared to the horrible things that happen to you when you are governing Britain, seeing a few ghosts is nothing. And nothing like dead Scotsmen for making the earth soft and comfortable. Can I for my own mother? Asked Winifred, pointing to a round pit into which prisoners had once been thrown so as to starve to death. It's so pretty. Now that the nurses did nothing but guzzle beautiful bananas and parade around in frilled dresses, which they washed 3 times a day, it was time someone remembered sorrow and awfulness. And then one last quote. Belladonna had packed her straw basket and had folded her tent, and was only waiting for Terence to be found before going away forever to a life of loneliness, begonias, and pain. So these are smooth quotes. There's nothing like the impression's immediate. You're not sitting there puzzling over the lyrics. I read some before we met. I read some lyrics from the Robert Southey's infamous 1801 poem "Thalaba the Destroyer to Hound." I will spare you all the suffering, and you can not read it. If you would like to feel prose pain, search it up on your own time. It's free online. 1801. Very famous poem at the time, again in purely literary circles. And that poem did not translate to eternal success because it's an agonizing, very painful, very, very painful read. In contradistinction to Southey's then less known contemporaries, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Keats, and Blake. But yeah. Like there is, but at the same time, the language provokes thought, because the way the words are arranged, and the way like it's this called subtle interplay between a whole bunch of notes of one variety and then a counterstroke, like dun 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 dun, where you sort of get a suddenly like something peeks through and totally changes the sentence. And all of a sudden, instead of talking about a normal place where we go to sleep, we're talking about a round pit in which prisoners had once been thrown into so as to starve to death. Or remembering sorrow and awfulness. And, you know, to buttress our pro-Bob the Builder argument, I think, still a little further, Pawn and his dialectic of pain or negativity is very in line with the European literary response to the horrors of the Second World War. Not to say that Bob the Builder's replying to that, but did you ever read Madeline Long Gellhound?
A while back.
Yeah. author of A Wrinkle in Time, which is an amazing book that, again, we might actually do a whole stream on at some point, because Longell, not many people know this, but Madeleine Longell was a very competent, very educated, and very profound philosophical thinker who wrote a lot of tragically pretty obscure essays on themes of redemption and forgiveness and friendship and true love. Themes that you can see brought up in the novel version of A Wrinkle in Time, and which sadly did not translate to the movie version, which was based around self-love and not love of others, like the book, thereby inverting the whole theme. But Madeleine Longell was reacting and wrote. He wrote a foreword to John Masefield's novel, The Midnight Folk. I want to say in the mid-70s. Could have been mid-80s. The Midnight Folk was a very Victorian novel, written between 1890 and 1920, somewhere in that period, about a young boy. It's been ages since I read the book, who discovers that his family committed a horrible mistake generations ago, and for the sake of his family's honor, he has to erase this mistake. But a whole coven of witches are trying to stop him because that mistake involved a substantial amount of money that they would like to get their hands on. And Longell wrote a foreword about. She wrote when they reissued the book. She wrote this fascinating little foreword about how do I phrase this in a way that makes the relevance all clear. Like, family honor is certainly not a theme of most children's books nowadays, and not something you're even going to find in a lot of adult novels, fiction or nonfiction. And she wrote that, I guess, concern with the honor of our family and persons was a sort of. I am aggressively intellectualizing her here when I say it was a sort of necessary engagement for who we were as people. And she hoped that Masefield would be able to displace the negativity and ennui and obsession with suffering that had so colored European literature. And tragically, Masefield's little children's book did not manage to pull off that miracle. Because that is still European literature today, as anyone who has read Susan Sontag is well aware. Or even seen the movies they put out in the artsy movies, that is, not. So yeah. On the one hand, we can see maybe I shouldn't go. Hold on, where do we want to go from here? You can see where Han's coming from if you look at Marvel. There's really not much going on there under the surface. You can also see, however, that Han's solution is potentially as problematic or wrong as what he's being critical of. And lastly, I don't actually think we started with these questions. Is there an aesthetic of the smooth in Bob? What is Bob's aesthetic? And we've talked about several episodes of Bob the Builder, and superficially, it's a smooth TV show. It has to be. Kids literature can provoke deep questions, can occasionally be very uncomfortable. The Chronicles of Prydain being an amazing example. Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising. It however, has to maintain that fundamental smoothness, because children struggle to grasp deep concepts. And therefore, the complex purple prose and extensive existential plumbing or whatever is going to go it'll go over the heads, and it'll lose the interest of children's readers. Which is why I was mentioning to Hound.
Yeah,
I'm
just gonna find an 8-year-old and be like, here's Here's some Gene Wolfe. This is the shadow of the torturer.
So
Read.
years and years ago, I was helping a child draft a Mother's Day letter. And because children, he's not a good planner. So he's writing. His letters are getting bigger and smaller as he goes, and he runs out of space midway through his word. Like he just hits the side of the card, and he goes, "Oh no!" And I go, "Oh, don't worry. You can just put a hyphen and then continue the word on the next line." And this little boy looks me dead in the eyes and goes, "I'm 6." And it's like, okay, yeah. So we settled for finishing the word by writing down. So yeah, children, they are a lot more intelligent. They do have more of an ability to grasp deeper concepts than a lot of people might think. There is nonetheless a clear limit to that. And this especially includes implications and extensions of ideas. Which is why children's literature needs to be smooth. And so before we met, I mentioned to Hound, and I'll reiterate here, one of the reasons why you will often find, weirdly enough, as a philosopher, or just as a normal person, you will often find children's literature to be paradoxically a lot deeper than a lot of stuff that's marketed for adults, is children's literature, it has to do both. Like, it has to market it, it has to be smooth, like, it has to be easy to immerse yourself in and easy to get attracted to, or kids are uninterested. And it also has to be thought-provoking, or extend their mind, or open a new perspective on things, because the first 4 to 12 years of a child's life have a huge impact on the rest of it, and the more and the deeper you can get them to think as adults. And this is really noticeable with awareness of other minds. We know intellectually that other people have minds, which is just a philosophical way of saying, they have their own emotions, they have their own sentiments, they have their own values, and these values might not be expressed the same way we'd express ours. And part of being a respectful adult is understanding that when we approach other people and see that, maybe somebody loves going to concerts, but his friend starts to look panicky whenever gets around loud noises. Awareness of other minds for adults is simply understanding that what your friend is doing. Is you might like concerts and loud noises and large crowds. He does not. But while that's arguably an innate faculty, it's a learned skill. It is a learn, and especially the cues and the implications, and all the little shifts, especially when it comes to language. It is very, very easy to cover up discomfort and pain with words. And it's something a lot of people don't develop when they're kids. And so when they become adults, it's just a lot harder to gain that skill. Right? So when you're writing a kid's book for kids, you're approaching both of these angles. You have to create a smooth work. It has to be something the kids want to read. But it also can't just be 50 pages of fart jokes. It has to have something that broadens. It has to have something that broadens the kid's mind, or opens a new perspective, or teaches them something about the world to justify its existence. Especially because kids do not buy their own books. Adults buy them for them, and adults check for that sort of thing. if they're good parents / teachers.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned to Hound that this is why I think that at last push, a lot of deep children's literature or famous children's literature is actually more profound than a lot of the same stuff for adults, right? Because adults, you can just market whenever. And so long as you can get somebody... Yeah. And Mr. Rogers was certainly intentional about that. Because again, like musical sense, Mr. Rogers was very aware that, music elicits responses, very deep responses in us. And yeah, like challenge, like complexity, virtuosity.
By the way, reminder that if you're responding to a comment, you should probably read it out because it's not.
Oh, my apologies. Patui commented, "I'm reminded of musicians being surprised by the unnecessary musical virtuosity and challenging complexity of the jazz combo band that did music for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood." And yeah, like at one level, of course, it is like it's correct to say that it's unnecessary because it's not like they can't intellectually appreciate musical virtuosity, but they do notice it. They're aware of it. They react to it. It elicits a definite response. It has a definite effect. And while they might not be explaining their response to Mr. Rogers' "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood," like in the same way that like I just did with this extensive conversation, that I won't say it's on the upper end of the intellectual stratosphere, because I've been trying to keep words like ontotheological perturbations out of the conversation. The transcendental immanence which we encounter through our reverberations with Noam. I've been trying to keep the language, but this is still very much an intellectual conversation that is way beyond what children can grasp. But they would have said much of what I said, just in much simpler terms. And probably more effective terms if we're talking about, I want to say, impact, intelligibility. But that's a separate topic. That's a slightly, well, actually, I guess it's sort of related. The way intellect has to sort of retreat from the object it studies to fully cognize itself. And then this also creates a block, because if you then can't return to the original object, you risk getting lost in your intellectual reflections. But yes, so to finish, I guess I did not think we had 2 hours and 10 minutes about Bob, and we're 2/3 of the way through. Speed run this last bit. Much of what we've been playing off of has been assuming a false dichotomy. Right? We've been comparing transcendence, or this negative distance, to immanence or smoothness. But as anyone who's ever experienced either knows, both of them are really sort of different ways of interacting with the same thing. But the two interact with and to some extent presuppose each other. Like it is, people debate, if you get into theology, you'll see people debating transcendence versus immanence. To me, it's a false debate, because neither can exist without the other. Not truly. And certainly not in any meaningful or salient sense. I had some notes here that I think we can gloss over, because they were about... Did we want to discuss the way Han uses East Asian philosophy wrongly, or do you want to cut that out and maybe handle it in a different stream?
I don't know. Maybe we can do a different stream. We can do something.
Different stream, yeah.
Yeah.
Han, very, very, very briefly, I guess. One of the big shifts in European philosophy, which has mimicked the spread of, like, what would you call it? What did they call it? What did they call it when the Beatles brought all that guru and that whole wave of guru stuff in the 60s? Anywho, back in the 60s, 70s, there was that big wave of like guru passion, like absolute adoration of Indian culture, Indophilia, like Hinduism and Buddhism, especially Taoism from China to a lesser extent, that hit the West. Mania for the East, and this culture shift was paralleled intellectually by the increasing turn of academics to an idealized East where being does not exist. Anyone who's read Alan Watts has been on the fringe of the intellectual sphere.
Yes, Alan Watts, the true interlocutor of the East.
Yeah, Alan. Yeah, God. I mean, I know Alan Watts is very shallow, but he is summarizing a lot of intellectual developments going on in the West and then regurgitating them for his rich hippie audience. But yeah, you had a lot of philosophers like Francois Laruelle, Byung-Chul Han, Hans Georg Moeller. There's a whole bunch of other, Roger T. Ames, arguing that what made Asian philosophy distinct and superior to the West is that it had no notion of being, so human beings, and it had no notion of the self. I think in both cases that is incorrect. Bob the Builder has joined the stream to comment. Darn.
Based.
Based, yeah. So you see, Bob, there's a lot going on in your TV show because, like this is it's a false view that of East Asian philosophy, I should say, that obsesses over nearness or immanence. To the extent of transcendence, and that construction, like the construction that you see throughout the Bob the Builder TV show and Bob the Builder's like his aesthetic acts, actually they transcend and sort of unify that sort of dialectic, what they call harmony or he in East Asia. I had in mind the episode, we talked about Bob's top. I don't think we've talked about Bob's top team on stream yet, eh?
I don't think so.
Okay. So do you remember I mentioned earlier that Bashing Crashing Benny manages to recover that, like by accident, he's going around trying to bash and crash. It's not working. Because everyone is engaged in work that's too gentle, so he finally loses it. Try to smash through a wall, just so he can say he smashed something. Right? He's like, I'm going to make a tunnel here, and I can get around. And he ends up burying himself under a slate, but in the process, he exposes a plesiosaur skeleton, which is awesome. Like, we all love dinosaurs. And I mentioned at the time that they took it down to the museum. That is the subject of an entire different episode. And that episode is, it's defined by I want to say the absence of Bob, because Bob is in the episode. The interruption between Bob and his machines. Right.
All right.
So Bob has his collection of talking machines. Right. like or the construction equipment. They go around chatting, they talk, they exhibit remarkably human-like characteristics. Several of them have the ability to balance on their hind legs and pick stuff up with their front wheels. Similar to the talking scarecrow, none of this is ever explained. It is just a miracle of Bob the Builder world, because like all truly divine kids shows, Bob the Builder exists in a magical universe where the laws of causality are suspended, except where necessary to forward the plot.
I posit that Spud the Scarecrow is cultivating his way toward humanity.
Spud the Scarecrow, Taoist immortal. But anywho. Anywho, so Bob's he's building. They plan. They're arranging the inside of this museum, and they plan to hang, which is just a whole bunch of stuff from town. Most of it exceedingly mundane. It's like, here's a picture of corn. Here's a chicken, and then it's like, and here's our plesiosaur skeleton. As one does, like every time I think of a good museum, I think of pictures of corn, a chicken, and a plesiosaur skeleton. So Bob promises his trucks that he will go with them to pick up the fossil, which is a super dangerous task because fossils are fragile, after he's done setting up the interior of the museum. Unfortunately, he is unaware that everyone else has taken the presence of Bob, who they all adore and admire, as an excuse to come up with all sorts of truly fantastical, convoluted suggestions for what the booths should look like. And Bob is so distracted repairing or making all these booths and like pictures of corn, because he's apparently a multifaceted, like he's Bob the Builder, but he also knows like painting and landscape design and animal ecology and water main repair, like true genius. Bob the Renaissance polymath. That's what it should have been called. Anyway, he gets so distracted that night falls. And he's panicking because he promised his machines that they would all go pick up the fossil together. And when he leaves, the machines aren't there, and he thinks they've all gone to bed in disappointment. He finds out that actually they decided to surprise Bob and went to get the fossil themselves, and that not only did they do this, they figured out how to work together as a team, each taking advantage of the other's strengths and adjusting for the other's weaknesses to traverse the mountain carrying a large and very fragile plesiosaur fossil. And I tell you this story. There's like on one end, this is an exceedingly typical kids narrative about like, let's all work together. On the other hand, it is a narrative sort of built around eruptions and disturbances, which is true for much of the Bob the Builder plots. Like I mentioned earlier, there's all those issues with his phone. And then there's all the issues with Spud. I don't think I said I told this like Spud's cork trees.
Nope.
Yeah, I'll save time. I will because we've now been going for almost 2.5 hours. Spud is like he's keeping everyone on the farm awake with his snoring, and the next day he hears them say, will take immediate action to like change things. And Spud thinks he's being kicked out, so in despair, he wanders around until he discovers a bunch of cork trees. And he realizes that cork reduces noise. So he ties the cork tree onto his shoes, And then because he's now super silent, he keeps accidentally upsetting people and causing havoc and chaos. And accidental mass devastation of all the fruit juice bottles. I think it was fruit. Some sort of bottle. I think it was fruit juice. But at the same time, Spud's idiosyncratic discovery is also what proves to be the solution both to the devastation he caused and to his snoring at night. Because they are now able to make earplugs out of corkwood. And so we see both motions, right? We see negativity and we see positivity, or smoothness and transcendence, together, and not just like in the same narrative, but in the same breath.
Ooh.
It's at one and the same moment we encounter both.
Very nice. Very nice. This is good wisdom.
This is, well, yeah. And I guess, like, why did we do a 2.5-hour stream talking about Bob the Builder? It was this point. It was the point about, like, we set up in our mind this aesthetic dichotomy between smooth works, Brandon Sanderson, for instance, Bob the Builder, and negative works, and then people engage in like little petty fights. I could use stronger language there, I won't, with like, it's like, but you know, Susan's on Tog says that writing has to have a distinctive style, and what makes an author truly unique is her distinctive style. It's like, and Sanderson doesn't do, you know, it could be replicated by ChatGPT, which it couldn't be, but that's besides the point here. I think the style could be replicated by ChatGPT, but, and then the opposite, of course, is that such a complaint is frivolous and stupid, which is true, but but the reality of the matter is that this is just, there are novels that are both highly entertaining, right, very smooth, and yet simultaneously and in the same instances, intensely thought-provoking. Plato defines beauty very briefly. Like, it's aesthetics. Aesthetic is related to a word for, it means like aesthesia, sense perception in ancient Greek. So when Plato is talking, why doesn't Plato talk about aesthetics, for instance? The answer is it's his discussions on sense perception. And what Plato's definition of beauty is this, it's sudden fracturing of divine beauty into the world, coupled with the simultaneous revelation that this divine fracturing is consonant with the world. It both comes from outside, transfiguring our view of the thing itself, and reveals itself as having always been there. Yeah, you can. I know that's a little bit of an ornate definition.
That is not a very smooth explanation.
Well, think of it. It's like if you know a woman. Think of it as you know, like a high school sweetheart romance novel, right?
All right.
They've known each other for years. It's a smooth narrative. They know each other for years. They're comfortable with each other. And then an event happens that it breaks through the surface of their relationship and transforms it from a friendship to a romance. But it also reveals that in many respects, their romance was deeper the entire time.
All right.
Like a lot of good. What makes a good high school romance novel is not that a sweetheart romance novel. Sorry, like, you know, we've known each other since we were 4, and now we're 24. What makes that a good novel of that sort is not that they spend nine chapters in denial of their feelings or whatever. What makes a novel of that sort good, truly impactful, is their sudden revelation that at some point, obviously not when they were 4, At some point in their relationship had already become that deeper thing. And they don't know when.
Right.
And I used Spud, like Spud's cork, as an example of a similar, like, the situation appears chaotic, but actually the solution has been there the entire time. We just needed to see things a different way. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit is very similar. The whole plot in The Hobbit, it does involve very extensively around that misdirection that nonetheless is sort of consonant with the original thing, with what's actually the literal description of events.
Oh,
with like all the riddle contests, large swaths of The Hobbit are based around this very clever utilization of language, right? And it's sort of relationship, like the characters aren't talking to each other normally, at least the characters who aren't on good terms, like Bilbo Smaug, Bilbo Gollum, Bilbo the orcs, etc. They're talking, Bilbo the elves, or the elves and dwarves, they're all talking in riddles. And yet the thrust of the communication is clear the whole time.
Yeah.
But because they're using riddles, they're allowing more deeper issues to move around under that surface.
All right. So is that our presentation?
Yeah. There were a couple things we skipped over. Like we didn't really discuss Han's arguments in Good Entertainment, but that's okay because we covered them by implication. Han does talk about how a lot, and I brought up The Hobbit. If you guys look at the list of really famous literary works or really famous works of art that people actually like, you will notice that most of them were written for the public. They were not like Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, Bach, like the symphonies and cantatas and whatnot of Bach, and of Mozart or whatever. A lot of that was not written for obscure audiences. That was written for the public. So it was intended to be, like, Tolkien is another excellent example. It was intending to be smooth. It was intending to be like Bob the Builder. And yet, like Bob the Builder, it contained profound and hidden depths that sort of has ensured that the works have enduring value, not just as things the public enjoys, but as things that can be reflected on and have much more deeper meaning to our lives. And unless you have anything else you want to add on, I think this is 2.5 hours. This is an excellent spot to stop.
Yes.
I have been Wild Philosopher. He has been Hound of Heaven. If you enjoyed this stream, I would be very grateful if you would like, subscribe, share to your friends, email me queries about more profound topics on Bob the Builder for us to speak on. Or hey, we can even do other children's shows. That would be fun. Or yeah, like, comment, subscribe, buy my books. No.
Yeah,
do all of that, yeah. And have a wonderful evening. Always remember that gnomes are real. Have a great night.